Time really does fly. Would you believe it if I told you that the India-China face-off standoff in Ladakh has now entered 6 months? That's right, it began in May. There have been 8 rounds of talks. Thousands of troops stand massed against each other across 800 kilometers in eastern Ladakh. But for the first time, there is tangible discussion on the table about a meaningful disengagement from the most tense part near the Pangong Lake. That's our big focus on Battle Cry, where we're going to sift the fact from the fiction and whether this is really the beginning of the end of the world's biggest military standoff.
The world's biggest military standoff. Ladakh freezing, but temperatures high. But after 6 months of tension, has the ice finally begun to melt? Have India and China agreed to disengage? Can India trust China? The big Ladakh breakthrough is the big story on Battle Cry.
And just to remind you about the Ladakh standoff in numbers so far, because this really tells the story of how long and how big this has become. It's 4 flashpoints we're talking about. Pangong, both north and south bank. There's Hot Springs, there's Gogra, and there's Galwan. That's the entire stretch of the 800 kilometers. And remember, this does not count the Deppsang plains. 6 hostility zones in all where troops are very close to each other. 6 months is the duration of this standoff so far, and counting. Winter is already here. It's 800 kilometers of front line where the standoff is taking place in eastern Ladakh. The number of clashes that have taken place is 4, including the Galwan clash, in which there were 20 Indian casualties, including the commanding officer of the 16th Bihar Regiment. At least 16 Chinese soldiers also perished in that same clash in the Galwan Valley. There have been 8 Lieutenant General level meetings so far in Chushul, Moldo. The most recent one was just earlier this month, and 5 divisions of the Chinese army stand deployed in those areas of eastern Ladakh, and this is a deployment that's been matched, of course, by the Indian army. China has already begun playing its mind games again, but what we can tell you for sure is that there is a discussion, a tangible discussion for a disengagement in the Ladakh standoff. It's a 3-step formula that's on the table and very much part of discussions between India and China. But will it really work, or will it fail?
After 6 months of a tense standoff. After 6 months that have involved tremendous spillage of blood. Massive provocations with medieval weapons. And a near war situation across 800 kilometers of front line in eastern Ladakh. Is the end to the standoff finally in sight? While trust remains at an all-time low, India today has learned that the festive season could see the first steps of a larger pullback. The proposal under discussion is a time-bound disengagement that focuses on the north and south banks of the Pangong Lake and a return to pre-April positions. It is here that the standoff actually began in early May and has become a focal point of very close deployments on both banks since late August. The disengagement is proposed to be carried out in 3 steps. In the first step, tanks and armoured personnel carriers are proposed to be moved back from their frontline deployment to a significant distance from the line of actual control by both sides 24 hours after both sides agree. In the second step, both sides will withdraw 30% of troops every day over 3 days. Under this proposal, the Indian Army would shift forces back to the Dhansing Thapa post of the ITBP west of Finger 4, while the Chinese will go back to their earlier positions east of Finger 8. In the third step under the proposal, the two sides will withdraw from their respective positions from the front line along the southern bank of Pangong Lake area, which includes heights and territories around the Chushul and Rizangla area. The proposal also includes a crucial joint mechanism to verify progress in the disengagement process through delegation meetings as well as using unmanned drones. The proposal, still under discussion, came up during the last Corps Commander level talks on November 6. The disengagement formula is said to have been discussed and finalized at the highest levels of government by the Prime Minister's own trusted security quad on the Ladakh situation, comprising National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, Chief of Defence Staff General Bipin Rawat, Army Chief General Manoj Mukund Naravne and Air Force Chief RKS Bhadauria. The Chinese aggression in May has gone on to trigger 2020's defining military mobilization with world's two most populous countries, both nuclear-armed, entered into a spiraling standoff. From the bloodshed in Galwan in June to the tentative token pullback in July, to China's duplicity and expansion of the standoff to areas like Deppsang and southern Pangong, the trust factor remains at an all-time low. So why should things be any different now? The Chief of Defence Staff dropped a clue a few days ago.
The situation along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh remains tense, and the PLA is facing unanticipated consequences of its misadventure in Ladakh because of the Indian Defence Forces' firm and strong response. Our posturing is unambiguous. We will not accept any shifting of the line of actual control.
China, now stuck, cannot move further. Not the first time China is talking pullback. Indian actions put China on back foot in South Pangong. China has invested hugely in deployment across 800 kilometers. Disengagement proposal at highest political level. Chinese hostilities were on orders of Xi Jinping himself. Chinese experience at high altitude hasn't been good. China is sitting squarely on territory claimed by India. With the modalities worked out, the only question now is whether the two sides can agree to kick it into action. One thing is certain, India won't be leaving anything to chance or trust. With Manjeet Negi in Delhi, Bureau Report, India Today.
So there is this disengagement formula that's under discussion. It hasn't been finalized or agreed upon. China is already cocking a snook at media reports. But these are the big questions that we're asking based on this formula itself. Question number one, is this disengagement proposal treachery proof? Because China, as we know, is already proven to be a treacherous, forked-tongued nation when it comes to this standoff. Question number two, does this proposal require trust? Or is it fail-safe? Because when it comes to trust, there is a huge deficit when it comes to China. It's at absolute zero. Big question number three, can India respond effectively in the event of a breach? In the sense that if India moves back, what if China changes its mind and stays at those positions? Number four, what about disengagement in the other friction points? This disengagement plan is only about Pangong North and South. What about the other friction points, including Galwan, Deppsang, and many others? Question number five, will the disengagement lead to a complete de-induction? Disengagement, a small pullback is fine, but what about sending every one of those tens of thousands of soldiers back into their barracks? That is where the peace will be. And finally, is full disengagement ever going to be really possible in eastern Ladakh, given how far this standoff has come? Live on Battle Cry this week with me, Gaurav Sawant, our senior executive editor, Sandeep Punithan, executive editor, India Today magazine, and Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, Shaurya Chakra, former Director General Infantry and also Chief of Staff of the Ladakh Corps. Gaurav, coming to you first, what has changed now? There is all this discussion happening about a proposal for disengagement. China has already begun to play mind games, saying that, that there is no such thing, to actually discuss. But why does China even want to talk about disengagement at this time, Gaurav? What has changed?
The harsh winter and the harsh realities that are now sinking in, Shiv. China has been facing casualties, not just on the north bank of Finger 4 or Pangong So, but also in some of the other areas where China transgressed. And China wants a face saver, a tactical retreat. At the same time, China does not want to give up on the advantage of being the first mover in this area. So China is only talking about disengagement, not about serious de-escalation, except moving back some pieces of artillery, armor and mechanized forces. And it is not talking about de-induction at all. In fact, from what sources tell India Today, with India dominating the Moldo Heights, China's already looking at an alternate route, which means China appears to be here for the long haul, and a withdrawal, even if tactical, perhaps would need to be well thought out in the long term. There may be short-term advantages, but long-term needs to be well thought out, Shiv.
Absolutely, and the long term is precisely what the Indian Army will be keeping its eye on. Sandeep, given that trust is an absolute zero right now after Galwan, which was the last time that a de-escalation was, attempted between both sides, how does India even navigate a disengagement discussion with China when trust is already so low?
Shiv, verifying a de-induction and a de-escalation on the ground is going to be the biggest challenge because, as you mentioned, after Galwan, and Galwan happened precisely when the Indian Army had gone to verify the Chinese had withdrawn from the place that they were at in the Galwan Valley. Now, this is one of the biggest challenges, and now, from what Gaurav was saying, the Chinese preparations for the winter are on in full swing. Despite the talks, I've been talking to people there and they say that the preparations for the winter are on in full swing. There's been no let up in that. The bigger concern now, Shiv, is that even if the de-induction and de-escalation does indeed happen, and it's not going to happen anytime soon, even if it does happen, there is every prospect that the Chinese have built up their infrastructure there in such a way. They've continued doing this over the last couple of months. They have built it up in such a way that they can come back into the theater very rapidly. And that is one of the concerns that the Indian Army has on the ground as well, Shiv.
And to hear more about those Indian Army concerns, General Kulkarni, this is not something where, the soldiers can simply walk back from their posts and then de-induction happens. This is something that has taken 6 months to build up in such a way. The Chinese have actually, put in an enormous amount of cost to be here in such large numbers. What concerns will the Army be looking at as it navigates these disengagement discussions with China?
Shiv, first and foremost, trust deficit. You can't trust China, primarily because of its deceitful conduct. The Chinese, the way they have conducted themselves in the last about 100 plus days is awful, absolutely awful. Never, nobody had ever expected. I'm sure there's something wrong with China for the way they have done. But having said that, the very fact that the Chinese seem to realize that the Indians have taken a very strong stand. They are not budging it. They are insisting on status quo ante April 2020. And if that be so, and what happened after August, the way the Indian armies occupied those heights is what is bothering the Chinese now.
Yes.
And whatever one might say, the harsh winter, what Gaurav is talking about, is actually bothering the Chinese. We are, in any case, battle hardened. We are, in any case, have always been staying at those altitudes. We are quite acclimatized and accustomed to that kind of living. I don't think the Chinese are accustomed to that kind of living. Having said that, and the Chinese have actually mobilized very, very close. They can actually, can get into their battle positions fastest. But we are already where we are. So it is for the Chinese to do whatever. They have initiated whatever has happened along the LAC. And it is they who seem to now realize that they have committed a mistake, that the whole world seems to be against China. the opinion, even if you take an opinion in India, 90% seem to hate China now. If you take that opinion the world over, more than 75% people tend to hate China. So the Chinese have realized that economically they would be doomed if this is the state of affairs. So they're looking for a face saver. I agree with you, it's just a face saver. And these are all discussions which are probably going on. I haven't heard it officially, though I'm told Global Times have refuted to say this is all absolutely
they are playing mind
fake
games, yes.
that the Chinese have said. But I'm sure if there are 8 rounds of talks that are going on between the core commanders, the talks would actually be revolving around disengagement and to reduce tension. Small error, a small accident can lead to catastrophic, and if Chinese attempt to even change the LAC, I think they are looking for trouble, and that is what is bothering the Chinese now.
It's bothering the Chinese in a big way. And Gaurav, could you tell our viewers whether this new disengagement discussion that's happening right now, is it happening at the military level or is it happening at a higher level, a political level that is invisible to most of us?
So from what we've been told as of now, there have been several rounds of discussion, 8 rounds of discussions at the level of co-commanders.
Yes,
there has been a discussion between Wang Yi, the Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister, and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, and of course also with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. So this is the level at which conversation is happening, publicly and also behind the scenes. But Shiv, if I may, India is also insisting that withdrawal not only has to be in these areas but also Deppsang, because Deppsang security is of crucial importance to India and Daulat Beg Oldie and that belt. So it cannot be detached from what's happening at either the Finger area or south of Pangong. So, and from what one of my sources was telling me, Shiv, even if China agrees to go back beyond Finger 8 and India comes to the Dhansing Thapa post, that will remain restricted to this area. That is restoration of pre-April 2020 situation. South of Pangong So and Deppsang are likely to be linked, Shiv.
Very, very interesting. Sandeep, Deppsang is the big, gorilla in the room, as it were, because this particular disengagement discussion that's purportedly on, at whatever stage it might be, is focused around the positions north and south of the Pangong Lake. But as we know, and as we've been reporting, Sandeep, there are very many more friction points, including huge deployments, in the northern plains, in the Deppsang area. So, one doesn't really know what the larger disengagement plan is going to be, because right now it's still very focused on Pangong.
Absolutely, Shiv. And Deppsang is one of the biggest areas of concern from whoever we've been speaking to. Deppsang worries everybody, given the fact that it threatens subsector north. In fact, our entire military deployment in subsector north has been threatened by the Chinese deployments. And we've been told that the Deppsang incursions happened before this and a couple of years back, and this has been gradually being built up by the Chinese to threaten this very vital subsector north area. And the attempt of the army and indeed the government would be to leverage our gains on the Kailash Hills, which is a strategic gain, because from the Kailash range, you can dominate virtually the entire Chushul area. You're looking into Moldo, and from Moldo, beyond that, you have the G219 highway. So the attempt would be to leverage what we have in Chushul with the Deppsang incursion. Because let's face it, Shiv, the Chinese incursions in the Pangong, so the North Bank, they're not as significant as what they've done in Deppsang. And that, as you correctly mentioned, remains the gorilla in the room.
And General Kulkarni, the gains that India has made since late August, south of the Pangong, are seen as having, built up a huge amount of leverage against the Chinese. So any disengagement that happens right now will have to, apparently see India scale back from those gains that have been made since late August.
Shiv, what I understand, that even if these kind of disengagements do take place, they would be taking place in various phases. In phase 1, like what I hear about, the armor, the APC, the artillery would rather move back. In phase 2, there will be about 30% troops disengaging. And that is the reason why the occupation of heights on the southern bank, whether it's at Razangla, Rechenla, or Tiger Top, or Black Top, Gurung Hill, Magar Hill, is not being thought of at all. It is in phase 3 and subsequently. And that could possibly be the reason why that the Deppsang has been there for quite some time now. What happens in Deppsang, there's a place called Y Junction. And
Yeah.
that is where the Chinese try and stop the patrolling. Invariably, whenever it's a huge wide area. It's called Deppsang Plain. It's worth seeing plains, high altitude desert. It's absolutely miles. You can see everything. And
Yes.
that's where they come there and prevent patrolling from going. It's not that very, very serious also. But yes, definitely, why should anybody stop anyone from patrolling?
Exactly.
That is the reason why. So all these friction points will have to be resolved if disengagement and finally has to take place. Otherwise, it's no use, I agree with Sandeep totally. Now, you can occupy northern side, Pangong finger 4 to finger 8. What can you do occupying it? You're directly under observation. You're just sitting ducks over there.
Yeah.
So there's nothing very much. Chinese on their own should probably be wanting to go back from finger 4 to finger 8 and further east. And we are quite happy to be where we are. Only thing, what I understand is that there would be no patrolling taking place if the disengagement does take place in
Absolutely.
between finger 4 and finger 8. Earlier, we would be going up to finger 8 and they were coming up to finger 4. So at least there will not be any kind of face-offs taking place if we decide to come back to our post south of finger 4 and then
Right.
move back east finger 8. That is possible. And I think it is good in the interest of both the countries that the tension must not be there. All said and done, the troops are the ones who bear the brunt of it.
Absolutely.
And the tension, if there's lesser tension in the ground, so much better. It doesn't really make any difference. But a small accident, a small incident, a
Yes.
small something going wrong, or berserk firing a stupid chap doing something, it can lead to something like a skirmish, which neither of the countries would want it. That is the reason why the disengagement and de-escalation is a must.
The de-escalation and de-induction is a must. It's a best-case scenario. It still seems like an elusive prospect at this time because, as you can see, from Global Times to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, mind games are still very much being played, even as the discussion of a disengagement is there in the Indian media. That's the kind of adversary that India faces right now, one that speaks with a forked tongue. The one thing we can all be very clear about is that this is an area that's going to be militarized for long after the disengagement, if and when it actually happens. General Kulkarni, Sandeep and Gaurav, always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Battle Cry. Thank you. A meaningful disengagement in Ladakh is something we should all be hoping for, but China is a very, very duplicitous adversary, and therefore the Indian military will be leaving absolutely nothing to chance. We will continue to report that. Thanks for watching this episode of Battle Cry. See you next week.
Hi everyone, Preeti Chaudhary here. Hope you like this video. For latest news and analysis, like and subscribe to the India Today YouTube channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated. Thank you for watching.